Then menopause happened, and suddenly the same things that had always worked for me stopped working. For most of my life, I thought I understood food. I felt like I had a pretty good handle on what was healthy, how weight loss worked, and what you're supposed to do if you want to stay in shape. And if something stopped working, I assumed I just needed to tighten things up a little. Or at least I thought I did. For most of my adult life, I stayed around the same clothing size, but once I reached menopause, nothing fit anymore. I ended up buying all new clothes, but I never bought anything nice because I kept telling myself it was temporary. My favorite clothes just sat in my closet for years collecting dust because I was convinced I'd fit into them again someday. And the good news is that now I do. I'm once again able to wear those old pieces from my wardrobe that I still love. I didn't wake up one day and start eating completely differently. My willpower didn't suddenly disappear, but my body started reacting to food in a completely different way. And that was really confusing at first, because nobody really tells you that menopause changes the way your body responds to food. Looking back now, there are a few lessons I really wish I had learned sooner. It would have saved me a lot of frustration and a lot of beating up on myself. So today I want to share 5 food lessons menopause taught me the hard way. Because if you're in this stage of life and thinking, why is what used to work not working anymore? You're not alone, and you're definitely not doing anything wrong. One of the first things I noticed was that carbs suddenly hit me very differently. And that was really confusing at first because I didn't suddenly start eating more carbs. I was eating the same foods I had always eaten. For years, a few times a year, I drove an hour and a half to this authentic bagel shop. You know, the kind that boils the bagels before baking them in that special oven, and they hand them to you while they're still warm. I always bought 2 dozen bagels and stashed them in my freezer. Then almost every morning, I'd toast half of one, put a little butter on it, and that was just part of my normal routine. And it never made me gain weight. Breakfast for me was always centered around carbs. That half a bagel, cereal, oatmeal, or something else quick and easy. And because I've always been an early riser, up around 5 a.m., I ate breakfast really early too. Then about 2 hours later, I'd be back in the kitchen wondering what I could pick on to hold me over until lunch. And I had decided 11 o'clock was acceptable for lunchtime, even though it was still pretty early. I was basically hungry all morning without understanding why. I just thought it was normal. It wasn't until I changed the way I eat now that I realized how much that little half bagel in the morning had started working against me. And this is where so many women get confused, I think. The foods don't suddenly change, but our bodies do. And for a long time, I thought cravings and hunger meant I just needed more willpower. But it wasn't willpower, it was biology. My sister told me for years that carbs don't have to be the enemy. You just have to understand how and when to eat them. But that didn't really click for me until menopause. And once I started focusing on stabilizing my blood sugar, everything else began to change. And the good news is, this isn't about giving up carbs. I still eat bread, I still eat pasta, and I still eat all the foods that I love. Now I'm simply more intentional about when and how I eat them. And once I started paying attention to carbs and blood sugar, I realized something else was missing from my meals. That's when the second lesson hit me. Protein became my best friend. And this was really pivotal for me. For most of my life, I didn't give much thought to protein. I just assumed I was eating a pretty normal, balanced diet. What I didn't realize at the time was how much not prioritizing protein was affecting my energy. My body rhythm had always been the same. I would get sleepy in the afternoon. So for years, I tried to fix that with a snack, usually something sweet. I thought my brain just needed a little sugar boost. Looking back, my lunches were often pretty carb heavy, and then the crash would hit, and I'd try to fix it with more carbs. It was a counterproductive cycle I didn't realize I was in. Once I changed how I eat, I realized that crash had nothing to do with needing sugar. It had everything to do with not prioritizing protein earlier in the day. And that was a huge light bulb moment. My sister had been telling me for years that I probably wasn't eating enough protein, and she was right. When I started building meals around proteins and healthy fats, that afternoon slump basically disappeared. And it's funny because I actually noticed a change in my energy when my dogs did. They're such creatures of habit. So every afternoon when my slump hit, they knew it was time to go upstairs with me and take a nap or take some quiet time while I pushed through the slump. Once my energy started improving, they seemed confused for a while. They kept waiting for that routine afternoon break. And at first I brushed them off, and then I realized they were getting used to my new energy, and now they don't look for that afternoon break anymore. And because I stopped thinking about snacks all day, I stopped feeling that urgent 2 p.m. need for something sweet. My energy felt steady, and food stopped taking up so much space in my brain. That alone was a huge relief. And once my energy started improving, I noticed something else. The way I felt wasn't just connected to hunger and energy. Food was affecting my other menopause symptoms too. This lesson surprised me more than I expected. Certain foods can actually trigger menopause symptoms. For the longest time, I assumed that hot flashes and sleep issues were completely random and totally out of my control. But once I started paying attention, I started noticing patterns. One of the first things I noticed was spicy food. I love spicy food, Indian food, Mexican food, anything with heat. But after really spicy meals, I would often pay the price later with hot flashes, feeling overheated, and night sweats. I started noticing other patterns too. Caffeine was one of them. I still drink coffee, and I'm definitely not giving that up. But switching to half calf, half decaf made a noticeable difference for me. And once I made that change, I had fewer hot flashes during the day. Even the temperature of food made a difference. So now if I eat something really hot like soup, I always have a large glass of water with it, and that really helps a lot. It's just little adjustments like that started helping more than I expected. And I also noticed big changes when I cut way back on processed foods. I stopped waking up multiple times a night, throwing the covers off during a hot flash, then pulling them back on when it passed and throwing them off again. That cycle used to go on all night. And eventually it stopped happening when I cut out ultra-processed foods from my diet. I also noticed it with wine, which can trigger hot flashes for a lot of women. I still enjoy wine and I still enjoy meals out. I just pay attention to how certain things affect me now and adjust when I need to. Once I started making those small adjustments, I began noticing real improvement and relief. My hot flashes became less intense, my sleep improved, and I just felt better overall. And for the first time, I felt like I had some control again. But the fourth lesson I learned was this. Even after I started noticing improvements in my symptoms, there was still a big piece of the puzzle that was really frustrating: my weight. There was a point where I honestly felt my body had turned against me. I was doing the same things I had always done and getting completely different results. That was incredibly frustrating. For most of my life, I believed weight loss meant eating less, choosing low-fat foods, and counting calories. I think a lot of women our age were programmed to believe this, right? But every time I tried to diet by restricting calories, I would give up within a couple of weeks. I always felt like I had to choose between being thinner or actually enjoying my life. And what finally worked wasn't eating less. I started focusing on stabilizing my blood sugar, prioritizing protein, and being more intentional about how and when I eat. That's what helped me lose 25 pounds I had gained during menopause. And this didn't mean giving up the foods or special occasions that I love. So my dad is Italian and lives on good bread and pizza. And honestly, I would too if I could get away with it. I will never give up a good semolina loaf or New York pizza. I'm just intentional about how I incorporate these foods into my diet now. It's not about restriction, it's about understanding what works for my body now. And that leads to the fifth lesson. When and how I eat matters just as much as what I eat. For most of my life, I never questioned my eating schedule, but menopause definitely changed that. Waiting a little while before eating breakfast and focusing on protein and healthy fats made the biggest difference for me. My breakfasts now have more calories and fat than my old ones did, but they keep me more satisfied and make the rest of the day so much easier. And that change played a big role in the weight finally starting to come off. Eating feels simpler now, and there's less mental noise, less food stress, and less obsessing. Truly, one of the most liberating parts of this journey has been letting go of that deprivation mindset. The feeling that you either have to follow a diet perfectly or think, why bother? Because many of us were taught that dieting had to be all or nothing, and letting go of that has been incredibly freeing. Menopause changed the way my body responds to food, but learning how to work with my body instead of against it changed everything. And you don't just have to give into it. You don't need restriction, you don't need perfection, you just need understanding. In upcoming videos, I'm going to start testing real foods using a continuous glucose monitor and sharing the results so we can see how everyday foods affect blood sugar in a real woman's midlife body. Mine. These are my personal responses, so they won't be exactly the same for everyone, but they can be really helpful as a starting point. So if there are foods you've always wondered about, tell me in the comments. I'd love to know what you want to see tested. I finally feel free because I don't think or feel about food the same way anymore. And if you want to hear about changes I noticed after changing how I eat in menopause, I'll link that video right here.